progress. Recording stopped.
No, I have one in my car.
No, I know.
Okay, 1, 2. Looks like we have audio now. There's a bit of an echo.
No, you're all right, John.
Okay. Okay, so
Just give me 1 second to restart.
Recording in progress.
okay, thank you. So we'll start again. This is a joint meeting of the Wellfleet Selectboard and the Maurice's Campground Planning Committee. It's a working meeting, so there will be no public comment at this meeting. We have encouraged people to email in, which they've done in large numbers, and we are going to be working from the comments which run the gamut from these emails. I'll start out with a brief introduction. The Select Board has called this meeting because it has come to our attention that there are a number of concerns regarding the direction, focus, and density of the proposed development on this property. The primary concerns appear to be concentrated on the number of proposed housing units, and particularly on the primary aims of supporting housing for people working and living in Wellfleet and the Outer Cape who earn too much money to be eligible for traditional housing subsidies as provided through state and federal programs, but not enough to be able to afford market rate rents and, in particular, market rate home purchases. As we requested at the time this meeting was first proposed, we have received numerous emails detailing various concerns such as those I mentioned. Additionally, concerns have been raised regarding the environmental impact of a project of the currently proposed scale, issues related to public safety, traffic, etc. There have also been a good number of emails endorsing the work of the committee. Many of those have been somewhat more general in nature, emphasizing the need generally for affordable housing, on which most of us certainly agree. I have also periodically read some of the running commentary on social media, on the community space page, for example, and have seen both concerns and support expressed there as well. Now, I want to point out at this point, along with the constructive criticisms and the concerns, there has been a certain amount of negative comments directed at the committee and committee members. This doesn't help. We can agree or disagree on the nature of the project and its aims and goals, But attacks, personal attacks and accusations of ulterior motives and so forth are really unworthy of comment or consideration. We have to acknowledge the fact that the committee is made up of volunteers who have put a great deal of their time and energy into planning for the use of this property going forward. And we're not going to entertain personal attacks or accusations of unworthy motives and so forth. I will state, full disclosure, at the outset that I share some of the concerns that have been raised and concerns over how much oversight we're able to exercise as a result of, some of the funds we've accepted for the development or are proposing to accept for the development. When we first proposed the purchase of the campground and brought the proposal to town meeting, I and others had hoped that at last we would have a vehicle for addressing the so-called missing middle. The professionals, teachers, public safety personnel, town employees, tradespeople, both self-employed and those employed by local contractors, child care personnel, and in particular shell fishermen, who by law must be domiciled in Wellfleet in order to harvest in Wellfleet. These are people who make what would ordinarily be considered a comfortable living, but who, due to the upward pressure on housing prices, both rental and ownership, are forced to do the annual dance, scrambling for a remotely affordable summer rental, and then having to relocate for the winter and vice versa, or are forced to live elsewhere, sometimes at quite a distance away, and commute, which can be quite a burden, as we all know, in the summertime. In particular, people involved in the trades and the fishery need room for tools and supplies of their respective trades. Some of you may recall that at the time we began to form the committee, the one question I myself asked each applicant was whether they would support setting aside a significant portion of the property for affordable ownership opportunities. On the rental front, there's a real need for affordable rentals of studio and one-room apartments for young single professionals, such as school teachers, police and fire personnel, and other town employees. The preponderance of the feedback we have received, at least according to what I've seen, has expressed the concern that one or more of these needs will not be met to the extent that they need to be, and that the scope of the project exceeds the aforementioned needs by quite a margin. In order to respond to concerns over such items as wastewater, public safety, density, and so forth, I have asked that the meeting be attended by a representative of Weston and Sampson, the engineering firm consulting with the town on wastewater planning, to answer questions and correct any misapprehensions regarding potential wastewater issues related to the proposed development. Our police chief and Kevin LaRocco and Fire Chief Joe Capello have indicated that they would be attending in order to provide an overview and answer questions regarding possible public safety and traffic concerns, and also the chair of the planning board, Gerald Parent, to address questions regarding zoning and potential density. As I mentioned earlier, public comment will not be taken at this meeting, as the primary purpose of the meeting is to provide the select board with a clearer view of the direction of Maurice's planning, the Maurice's planning committee is currently following, and to give the select board the opportunity to discuss what kind of direction we might want to give to the committee in response going forward. There will most certainly be opportunities for the public to voice their concerns and ideas at joint meetings to be scheduled in the fairly near future. And I just also wanted to point out that
Sorry. When you're done.
Oh, okay. Carl had indicated he wanted to.
After that.
Oh, okay. Okay. We will, I think the best way to start off would be to have the chair, the now current sole chair of the Maurice's committee, present a, what's the term? A PowerPoint presentation.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman,
Yes.
if I could interrupt, Mr. Curley, who can't be here tonight, asked if he could make a comment, and I think it was after your comments and before Carl's comments.
Oh, okay.
So if that's all right with Carl?
Yeah, yeah. Ryan, are you on?
Yeah, it's not a comment about the project. I just want to note that I'm participating remotely. I'm likely to be participating remotely at a number of our future meetings as well. I'm recovering from surgery, so unfortunately I'm not able to be there tonight in person, and I just wanted to state that, and that's all.
Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. And Carl, without further ado.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. What's that? There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the select board of the town.
See, just before you start, I may have missed a proper protocol here of formally allowing them the opportunity to formally open their part of the hearing.
Well, again, it's not a hearing.
Oh, I mean the meeting.
Just so I want
Meeting, yeah.
So, call the meeting to order?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm calling the meeting of the Maurice's Campground Planning Committee to order. We have just this one item on the agenda, which is to talk to the select board in the town. Let me first just introduce who is on the committee. Ryan, who you just saw on the screen, Farouk Najmi, Roland Blair, Tim Sayre, Emily Ochtenberg, Lauren Arcamano, Jeff Sachs, Marianne Boswell, Robert Dupuis, and we also have had previously a number of people who previously served on the committee.
Trying to shut the audio. Never mind.
Okay. We also previously serving on the committee was Gary Sorkin, Bob Wagner, Karen Ruhlager, Heather Doyle, Dan Floyd. Technology problem here. First of all, I just want to say that we have, as a committee, heard the opinions of people in the community, and like everyone in Wellfleet, we love the town and really don't want to change it. The town is changing in many ways, and we think Maurice's is an effort to deal with some of those changes in a constructive way. So I'm glad we've had this opportunity here today. The charge that we got from the planning board focused on the need for housing that is affordable and accessible to people who work in town. And the challenge we included in our RFP for our master planner, which was the requirement that we need the housing and that it not alter the town's character. And that was in the RFP. So we're trying to balance those two factors. It's at the center of our work, and it continues to be. So, in other words, we want to meet the need for year-round housing, but preserve the qualities that we love about Wellfleet. Before going into the consulting business, I talked to a lot of people about what it would be like. And one person said, if you tear away everything else about that kind of work, really involves managing the tension between the desire to preserve the status quo on the one hand and the paradoxical reality that preservation often requires change. So communities constantly evolve. These landmarks have disappeared, and yet Wellfleet retains its unique character. I recently had last week had a big birthday. I am getting older. I've changed and continue to change, but I am fundamentally the same in terms of my character. So that's just a reality. The most telling evidence of how Wellfleet has been changing is the decline in enrollment in the elementary school. Housing supply and cost prevent young adults from settling in Wellfleet, launching a career, and building a family. And I think that's what we see here on this graph. Even Wellfleet households with two breadwinners cannot afford the median priced home in Wellfleet. This graph shows some typical jobs that people in Wellfleet hold, the average salaries, and if you can see, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, you can. This is median household income is well above that of these various professions, and the income required to purchase a house in Wellfleet, median priced house, is well above what even a two-income household can afford. So that's the basic problem. At the highest levels, the master plan involves having a vision for what could be, what could replace the campground at Maurice's. And the inspiration for that vision came from a Cape Cod Commission report, which was a set of design guidelines for Cape Cod. And the issue that they grappled with was what is the character of Cape Cod, and they felt that it was captured in traditional Cape Cod village centers. And it was interesting that the cover of this report actually is a drawing of Wellfleet. And I think it's something we all want to preserve, that, that sense, that character of the town. As the Cape Cod Commission notes, village centers embody smart development principles. These principles underpin every aspect of the master plan. Social infrastructure is a highfalutin term for something that is literally and figuratively pedestrian. It includes sidewalks, cafes, park benches, playgrounds, all these places where people come together and socialize with other members of the community. So that's one of the things we hope to create at the center of this village that we hope to see rise in Maurice's. Now there is a store at that location. We hope to reimagine that as a local independent year-round grocery store, cafe, and perhaps also other services, including perhaps co-working space on the second floor. Could be something like that. From this vision for transforming the campground into a village, the master planners explored how to realize that vision given the site's locational and physical potential, and there was constraints as well. The residential part of the neighborhood, we came up with the 250 units, and I know this has been a controversial topic, so I thought I'd walk through how we arrived at that. At the first community meeting, the sense that came out of it was that we should think big and maximize housing. That was the message that came out. At a subsequent meeting with the master planners, the committee said that we were interested the master planning team started with 200 units. They did that because they didn't know what the capacity for wastewater treatment would be. So they just used that number as a starting point. When they brought that up, the committee pushed back and said, how about looking at a range of 200 to 300? Then in November, at the second community meeting, there was a lot of pushback to the parking ratio of 1-to-1 that was needed for 300 units. And subsequent to that, the consulting team said to us that in order to retain the character, we had to alter that mix, and they felt that the maximum number of units was 250 year-round homes. And so that's been the working number we've worked with. And that's how we got there. For decades, Wellfleet grew year after year through subdivision development. That growth has slowed, but over the decade from roughly 2030 to 2040 is when Maurice's campground is most likely to be developed. It'll be developed most likely in phases. And assuming that it ends up being 250 units, it's not that far off from what the last decade of growth was in this town, and also is roughly equivalent to the number of households, I'll call them, that are there seasonally at the campground. Subdivisions consume a lot of land, so smart development principles called for clustered multifamily housing because it preserves open space and it's more economical and more economical to build. And so the most of the buildings that we anticipate would be on the site would be 2- and 3-story multifamily homes, and that allows for both a lot of buffer area around the outside of the property, but also a nice internal park-like area that appears differently on different version of the site plan, but you can see how clustering does create a lot of open space as well as saving a lot of money. In downtown Wellfleet, there is a lot of multifamily, not a lot, but there is some multifamily housing, and it still feels like Wellfleet. What we're talking about at Maurice is nothing is as tall, certainly, as the Historic Society building, but we are talking about some 2- and 3-story buildings. The scale, massing, materials, the form and proportions of heritage-informed architecture provides a human scale and relates to the character of Wellfleet. So the RFP that will go out to developers will include some sort of design guidelines, and this is just my understanding of what that kind of thing would look like. In terms of the number of units and how it would be distributed, we've talked about 175 rental units. 150 of those would be affordable, 25 of those would be attainable. So affordable are really what we refer to generally as low moderate income housing, which is supported with federal subsidies. Attainable is really that what John was referring to as middle market, that area between what is affordable with those subsidies and what people can afford in the market. And there's a big gap. So we're talking about a range of between 80% of NAMI and 200%. And then we're talking about another 75 units of ownership housing, also divided between attainable and affordable. The numbers, the 250 and that vicinity, came from the housing production plan for Wellfleet, which counted the need based on cost-burdened households. There are, in addition to cost-burdened households, lots of other people who need housing. So there's extreme commuters, like the ones John was just talking about. There's the unstable seasonal rentals that many people in the town rely on. Need stable year-round housing. There's multi-generational households, a lot of them in town, where young folks cannot find housing of their own in town and are doubling up with family members. And then there's just suppressed economic activity that would occur if there were more housing available. So there's many sources of demand. This 250 does not simply represent the cost-burdened households, though those are a very significant number in town. Environmental stewardship is important to everyone in Wellfleet, and high on the list of concerns has been wastewater. The Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan advises using new development as a financial and political catalyst for wastewater planning efforts, as was done at Lawrence Hill. So that development, as many of you know, the wastewater treatment facility that's going in there is also going to serve the school, the fire department, police department, and the amount of nitrogen that will flow into the harbor will be less than it is now, even with the 46 units of new housing that's there. So, and there was a lot of money that came from the state government because it was for affordable housing. And we hope that the same kind of thing can be replicated at Maurice's. So wastewater, currently the situation at Maurice's is terrible. Their waste is not treated. It goes into cesspools, which goes right into the ground. So our hope is that we will replace all of that with this neighborhood IA system. We also will have net zero energy efficiency. There's provisions about healthy building materials, and of course, as I mentioned, this preservation of open space. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod, the Cape Cod Commission, and the Housing Assistance Corporation mapped Wellfleet, as well as other communities on the Cape, with 3 goals in mind: to improve water quality, foster housing density and affordability, and protecting the most critical lands for habitat and other natural resources. And as you can see, the map highlights Maurice's Campground as just such an area where there's both the high priority on housing, but there is also this opportunity to provide sewage treatment and also to preserve some natural habitat. This map shows that green area is around the Silver Spring Brook. There is actually a state law that is meant to protect wildlife and these riverways, which requires a 200-foot buffer, which is the 3rd dotted line. Currently, there's about 40 trailers that are in that area. They will all be removed, and this area will be restored as conservation land. And then to put things further in context, we are really only talking about a sliver of Wellfleet. While a lot of Wellfleet is already preserved by the National Seashore, there's still over 5,000 acres of land that is developable. And this little sliver there is the 21 acres that makes up Maurice's. We're really talking about a very small development geographically, though I understand that there are a fair number of units. So to bring this to the close, let me talk about just what we're currently doing and our next steps. So we're working on a zoning overlay, which I think we'll be talking more about this evening. At this point, we are talking about 50% of the units would be affordable and 30% attainable, and then the remaining 20% could be either. We're trying to provide some flexibility. The reality of housing feasibility is that there really are not resources at this point for attainable housing, though we are very hopeful that there will be, particularly given the time frame we're talking about. The seasonal communities housing, And the state is fully aware of this need that we have, and we think that there's some opportunities that we've heard that in conversation at this point where we hope we can get more attainable housing here in town. But at this point, it's an indeterminate amount, so we're providing some flexibility for the developer. So the major activities we're engaged in at this point from here on out this year, the community engagement process around the zoning overlay, and we want to hire a development consultant to formulate a development strategy, to draft a developer request for proposal, and then later to assist in evaluating the proposals. So that brings you up to date, I hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go further, I just wanted to update. I had said earlier that there was going to be an opportunity for the board members and committee members to ask public safety related questions to our police and fire chiefs. Unfortunately, in view of the tragedy that unfolded in the Outer Harbor over the weekend, they are unfortunately tied up this evening and will be unable to join us until the next time we meet. We do have, is there someone from Weston and Sampson on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Frank Getchell from Weston and Sampson is online as it relates to the wastewater mounding and future work on the cesspools that we're working on a scope of service for.
Okay, I'll open it up to anybody who's on the board who's got questions.
I have a comment.
Sure.
And in Carl's presentation, just a couple of things came to my mind. The 300 units was based on the wastewater consultant looking at how much nitrogen could be reduced from going into the harbor. And with the campground and the 2 roads on each side of it, that raised up to 315, I believe, but let's just say 300. And that's where we started with the 300 because of that. And like Carl said, just like Lawrence Hill, it would be greatly reduced, the amount of nitrogen, even with everything going on there. And so as a team here, the planning committee and the consultants that were hired for the master plan, we started with 300 units. We reduced it to 270 at one point in time, and due to conversations with the general public that wanted to see it reduced even more, we went down to 250. However, in our community engagement meetings that there were a number of, the meetings in a box, and we had focus groups with people, which the shellfish community was one of those focus groups. We went through an extensive process. It was 10 months. I don't know how many thousands of dollars or how many thousands of hours was put into it. And we came up with a master plan. The master plan is flexible. I know John said about single-family housing. It's flexible enough that we can add more single-family housing if we need to. Let me see my notes here. And at those meetings, the majority of, and I have to say the vast majority, but the majority of the sentiment was build as many units as you can. And we, as a committee, along with the consultants, put as many units as we could, and we even reduced it because of feedback we were getting from the community. So, that's where we stand. And like I said, the opportunity was there. We had 10 months of meetings. I don't know how, and there's some figures that are in the master plan. 435 people were talked to about it. It was a huge amount, and I don't think Wellfleet's ever seen any community engagement like we put into this. It's been very extensive, and I like where we are. A lot of people may not like that, but like I said, that was our plan, and it is flexible too. Things can be changed before the final RFP and the developer is picked. So, thank you.
And can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
Marianne reminded me that I didn't mention in this presentation that we also are talking about a seasonal worker housing development, which will, again, this is a piece of the project that still we're working on. We really need to work more closely with the employers in the community to get a better fix on their needs and how they might participate in this. But I'm sorry I overlooked that.
Yes, go ahead.
A few things. First of all, I think that the seasonal workforce, in part, there's a conundrum because it's very clear that that's how Maurice is being used right now. But there doesn't seem to be any financing to make that happen. And so it will have to be somehow very creatively created. The other thing I wanted to say is being on this committee later than the beginning. I have not been on the committee from the beginning. I think that things have changed on the Outer Cape, and I think that that has influenced the way people are looking at this. When I came on this committee was when we were having the big meetings, and the very clear mandate that what we were hearing was build as much as you can. And I think that now, when we look around at other towns and we look at Lawrence Hill, we go, wait a minute, there's a lot being built. And we have to look at Maurice's as this isn't going to be built tomorrow. It isn't going to be built in the very near future. And we aren't pausing, but we are definitely pondering how the effect of all of these different developments in the surrounding towns and Lawrence Hill will influence the final development. Thank you.
Is there anybody online? Oh, somebody's got their hand up. Yeah, Emily.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, to introduce myself, Emily Ochtenberg. I am an affordable housing development consultant myself, so I'm familiar also through my work life with a lot of the issues that we've been dealing with. I want to make a couple of points. One is, yes, Marianne's made a good point about the changing nature of supply. In my view, these are very small dents that are being made in face of very large demand. I want to just remind everybody that for the 46 units at Lawrence Road, the developer received 292 applications, and that is affordable housing up primarily below 80% of AMI, with 11 units, I believe, below 100%. So that's a factor of 6 to 1 in terms of demand versus supply in that case. And 60% of those applications were from Cape Cod, 40% from off Cape Cod, but we're being advised, and I know this from my own experience too, that many applicants, apply for every development that's available without really looking at the map to see where it is. And so the experience generally with Cape developments is that the off-Cape applicants do not materialize into actually acceptable applications and people that actually want to move into those units. So I'm not seeing much evidence that the demand has fallen off. I want to just make a couple of other points about what we are recommending. All of the we are recommending that all of the units, whether they're affordable or attainable, be deed restricted in perpetuity. I think this is a really important point that I spend my whole career in what's called expiring use development. We don't want to have units where the affordability, whatever level it is, initially burns off after a period of time. And that has been expressed strongly in the community and also from the select board as a desire. So we are trying as well to build into the zoning directly that these will be affordable in perpetuity to the income group, the broad income category for which they were originally designed. Secondly, we're talking about a process that will be town controlled throughout. There's been a lot of negative comments about 40B developments. This is not a 40B development. This is a development that's going to proceed under the zoning overlay, which is totally controlled by the town, and as you know, has to be approved by town meeting. Any proposal for 40B development here will not be permitted if the town doesn't want it. The town controls the land. The town will dispose of the land through a land disposition agreement, which is a document in which the town will retain control over the important aspects of the development that it wishes to control. And thirdly, hopefully, through that disposition process, the town may be able to be engaged in some form of profit sharing down the road with the developer or developers. This is something that I'm seeing a lot in the work that I'm doing, where sites are desirable. Developers will agree, for example, to share development fees, to share cash flow, to share downstream profits. And that is a possibility that we can see on this site for the town down the road to recoup some of the money that it put into it. So, we're, just to be clear, we're not talking about a developer-controlled process here. This will be controlled by the town from the initial RFP setting out the framework of what we want to the selection of the developer or developers, and hopefully will include some financial benefits to the town. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Yes.
I forgot to mention one other thing. What we have been told is so when we talk about building these homes, we are hopeful and expectant that there will be financial help at the state and federal level. What we are being told is that for home ownership, we cannot find financial help. So, one of the things at the Housing Summit that Ann had recently, one of the resounding voices that we kept on hearing was people want to own their own homes, which I own my own home. I'm in my 14th home. I totally understand it. But if there's no way of getting federal or state monies to help us provide home ownership, we don't know how to do that. Go ahead.
Just mention one other thing about that, because we definitely are interested in the habitat type of housing. That's been something that we've talked about from the beginning. So there's home ownership that's possible without federal and state subsidy. It gets subsidy from charitable sources and from sweat equity. And so we certainly want to have that. It's not that there aren't some possibilities. That's what we are still hoping for, some particularly on state level, to get some home ownership possibilities from, there's a program called Commonwealth Builders. It's available or has been available to gateway cities. We are hoping that that will be extended to seasonal communities too. So we've been talking to legislators about that, and hopefully we'll get some support.
I have a question I think might be directed to the housing coordinator. If someone on the board has an answer, that would be welcome too. The number of people in Wellfleet who are challenged in terms of being able to meet housing expenses. Somebody, I don't know if I was talking to you or somebody else about the percentage of people who are in that category who are in homes and making a go of it, as opposed to those who need to be in homes. Is there a figure on that?
That wasn't me you were talking
Oh,
to.
okay.
I don't know from before the data that they used as part of the master plan and the HPP.
Lauren?
So I believe it's in both the housing production plan and in the more Reese's, the Studio G. They quote a number of, is it either 360 or 460 of cost-burdened households in Wellfleet.
Yeah, that's the phrase I was looking for.
I don't know where that number came from, but we understand that
So-
75% are homeowners.
It's from the Chaz, which is a more recent HUD publication, but there was an earlier version of similar numbers in the housing production plan. The current number is, I think, it's 465, and 64% of them are low and moderate income. The bulk of them are homeowners, but I want to go back to Carl's point about what we have based this need on. That's only one component of the demand and need. The others are the categories that Carl mentioned, people who work in Wellfleet but can't afford to have housing here. People who have, these people are not counted among the cost burden. People with unstable rentals, short-term rentals, people who are empty nesters, overhoused, would like to downsize but can't find other housing. And there's a couple of other categories I probably missed, but it's not just the existing cost burden households. It's a much larger, multiple categories of demand that Carl's little chart showed you.
Yes. Ryan, I'm sorry. I didn't
Yeah.
see.
So yeah, it is using the HUD Chaz data. So the housing production plan was from 2023, and the Maurice's master plan was finished in 2025. So at the time, and the same consultants, same consultants did that part for both the housing production plan and for the Maurice's master plan. That's J.M. Goldson. I've tried to dig into some of the information on rentals. Part of the issue is that there's not a huge number of year-round rentals available in Wellfleet. So that kind of, we're not Provincetown, which has a large number of year-round rentals, let's say. And so, it's kind of a reflection of the housing stock as it is. But then looking into the data, the data on rentals in Wellfleet is really poor. And I've talked to the Cape Cod Commission about it as well. The reported median rent for year-round rental in Wellfleet was $1,000, and we all know it's higher than that. Part of the issue is basically because we only have a certain number of renters or rental units. There's a lot of basically bias built in as to who's responding or not. And there's no good way of solving that, particularly because what people are renting, let's say, and we all know people that are, let's say, renting somebody's basement, and that's where they're living. Technically, that really shouldn't be a rental unit, but they're living in there, and it creates a lot of issues when you're trying to assemble a good picture of what the rental landscape is in Wellfleet for year-round rentals.
Tom?
Yeah, I just had a couple of quick questions, if I could. Carl, you were talking about 175 rental units, 150 being affordables and 25 being attainable. With the 150 affordable units, are they project-based vouchers or are they going to be portable vouchers?
What we're talking about is low-income housing tax credit properties.
So it's a little LIHTC
Right.
project,
And
okay.
if some very low-income units, there could be a project-based subsidy attached to it.
Project-based, that's
But
the
most
key.
of them, I mean, what we're talking about here are working people.
Right.
Who, it's not a problem of poverty as much as it is of precarity, of people just, the cost of living here is very high relative to what salaries are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank
Particularly
you.
housing.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
The project-based vouchers are scarce. They're a scarce commodity. They're very desired in terms of people who really need them. The state will require in any LIHTC development somewhere between 10 and 13% of the current numbers of those units will have to be for very poor people below 30% of AMI. And the state will provide project-based subsidy, either Section 8 or MRVP, which is the state version,
Right.
Generally for those units. So some portion of the LIHTC units, roughly 10 to 13%, is typically what is ends up being project-based subsidy.
Thank you.
Yeah, Josh?
I have a question for the wastewater consultant, if you don't mind us
No.
changing gears a little bit. We received a number of letters, the select board has, asking questions around the changes that the wastewater analysis has taken over the course of your time. And so without understanding the science behind it, my understanding is the underground mounding modeling has changed fairly significantly, and there's questions as to why. And while I don't know if it's significant or not, my understanding is there was some overlay map that you showed at one point that had a pink circle, and then suddenly the pink circles disappeared. And I would like to know what those are, because truthfully, I don't. And I know there's quite a bit of concern around that. So if you could just walk us through what the current state of play is for wastewater development at Maurice's, just that the board is fully up to speed on where we're at, I'd be appreciated. Thank you.
And I would add to that, the general concerns over the likely effluent from the treatment plant and its potential impact or lack thereof. None of us are experts at this. That's why we have you.
Okay, so let me first indicate that we've only been working for the town since late 2024. So there may have been information that had been put out by previous consultants, so I want to at least put that forward. We were retained to do initially the hydrogeologic evaluation related to the mounding potential, and which is what we've completed so far. And we looked at two scenarios. One was just a single location versus another location that took advantage of Studio G's loop design, where it had been proposed to take a look at putting the subsurface disposal systems beneath three different portions of the site. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, bear with me. hopefully this comes up. Okay, now, okay, it says I'm screen sharing.
Yes.
Yep.
Is it? Okay, bear with me, I just want to expand that. All right, great. I'm not used to using Zoom, we usually use Teams, so this is a little different for me. But anyway, regarding the evaluation that we did completed, and I don't know if this is the pink, this may be what you were referring as the pink circle. We had basically taken just one bed and actually based on what we knew for groundwater flow direction, I basically conceptually put it in the southeast corner of the property. And then what we also did was we adopted the three individual beds, which would receive the cumulative yield the same amount, and looked at those also. And those are the two scenarios that we looked at relative to the mounding analysis. And what we did was we varied the mounding analysis from what we originally were told was 50,000 gallons per day, which had been projected, and taking a look to see about the potential to increase that up to 120,000 gallons per day. I believe that was based on the concept that besides the occupants located at the Maurice's campground, there might have been the potential to bring on some of the properties to the south down around Village Lane, and I believe also to the north. So what we did was we, after our site characterization, where we installed we advanced 8 borings, and then on top of that, we converted 6 of those to monitor wells. So we used the monitor wells, the primary purpose being just to get water level measurements, to establish what the natural groundwater flow direction is, and that's what these blue arrows represent. But also what we did, we used those as kind of the baseline for when we do the mounding analysis, so we know where we're starting, and then we basically superimpose the loading for these 2 different scenarios to get a sense as to how high vertically the groundwater level will rise. That's the mound, and I want to make a distinction there. Sometimes people think when we say mound, we're thinking about the actual configuration of the bed. When I'm talking about the mound, I mean the groundwater mound. So the rise in the groundwater beneath the respective subsurface disposal systems. And then on top of it, what we do is we use the model to then project the lateral extent. So you have a elevation, the highest elevation or rise, the mound, the peak of the mound is going to be beneath the bed. And then as you distally move out from the bed, that mound then starts to taper down. And generally speaking, what will happen is that depending on the groundwater flow direction, that will kind of configure the shape of the mound. But for practical purposes, especially given the hydrogeology here, you can assume that it's going to look kind of like an ellipse. And that ellipse is going to be orientated, generally speaking, in the direction of the groundwater flow. So up to now, what we have done is we have vetted these 2 different configurations to see if indeed, at least based on the information we currently have, the site can assimilate the wastewater, whether it's from the 3 individual SDSs, subsurface disposal systems, or from the one main one, which would be, like I said, over in this area. And the answer is yes. The next step on that, though, is to basically submit to the state what's called the WP83. And the WP83 is going to have to know ahead of time what configuration or systems you as a town want to consider based on what you're hearing from the potential developers. So in other words, to go through the step of actually submitting the WP83, which is a work plan for doing a more detailed evaluation, including perk test, including groundwater background, groundwater monitoring, and so forth. You don't want to be putting out there different types of scenarios. You want to have a general idea of what do you want to do based on what the developer is doing. So we're kind of, right now, we're at a standstill based on that work. Okay, we've gotten to the level where we've been able to establish what the hydrogeologic conditions can assimilate on the site. As a sidebar, and I heard earlier mention about the cesspool issue. Back at the end of January, we had a call with the DEP out of the Southeast region regarding this issue about dealing with the cesspools. And it's my understanding they're supposed to be issuing a draft ACO for the town to consider with our assistance. I'm going to stop sharing this. But took care of that. And basically what that's going to require is we're going to be looking at pretty much mapping out those areas and also mapping what the groundwater quality looks like at the site. Obviously, with the cesspools, there's no remediation except for what Mother Nature can afford us. So the main thing most likely we'll be using is kind of what I'll call a tracer, will be something like nitrate, which is a common contaminant that's associated with wastewater disposal systems. And since we're in a sensitive nitrogen area anyway, obviously that would make sense. But the state may come back and ask us to include several other parameters. And at this stage, I can't really comment more than that because we are still waiting on that ACO. Hopefully that helped.
Just a quick question. Is that based on the maximum projected density of the project?
So those are the numbers that were provided based on the Studio G layouts and the information that came with them. We did a little bit of modification, I think, based on some cursory discussions with Ryan and somebody else from one of the committees. I don't remember. But we just took those numbers. So we didn't back into a number. The numbers were given to us. So I think what you're thinking is, what is the max that the site can handle? And that we did not do.
Okay, and a follow-up question would be, if, and this is going to come out in the discussion, that's going to be a question I'm going to ask after some other people have had a go, but if, for instance, we stagger the development, not being conversant with sewage treatment systems myself, is that something that can be built on a modular basis that as the density increases over time that the system can be added on to accommodate it, or does it have to be built for the maximum capacity anticipated?
So again, I'm a hydrogeologist, but what I do work with the wastewater group at Weston and Sampson, and I do know that it's not efficient to run a system, to build a big system now and run it with lower flows. They're designed for a particular rate of incoming water. And so now whether or not they can be constructed in components, I don't know. I suspect it can be. As far as the beds go, though, and the permitting, that WP83 is solely for the subsurface disposal. It has nothing to do with the treatment. That's
Right.
A different permit. So I think unless you're anticipating changing the layout, whatever way you're going to go on the site, I think it would be prudent to go with the WP83, assuming whatever your full build-out number is going to be, and knowing where you're going to have, you put them in reserve, the areas for the beds, so that you don't have to go through that every single time. In that instance, it would make sense to do it all at once.
So that part could be constructed to accommodate maximum anticipated flow
Yes.
without
wouldn't be using
harming
the
the
beds.
overall efficiency. Okay. Lauren?
Yeah.
Fred, your observations of the hydrologic conditions there were taken this last year during a level 2 drought. Does that have any effect on the numbers that you arrived at?
So we actually started doing that work during the winter. So we actually started doing the drilling back in late 2024, early 2025. And we actually, there were a couple precipitation events that happened. So the big thing on what happens with the drought or not is two things. Obviously, there's I'll call it the the average groundwater level. And that average groundwater level, pretty much gives us a place to start. I think where you're going is, was the average level too low? It appears to be based on the USGS data. There are 2 USGS observations wells in the area. We are pretty much at the same point. So it doesn't seem like the groundwater there was at that level at that time. It would be drought. It seemed to be more average conditions. Even if it wasn't, let's just say it was 5 feet lower, and which is typically what we see. Like we're seeing right now after the drought that we're coming out of. It's between 3 and 5 feet. If the level were to come back up, for argument's sake, as a safety factor, there still is a safety factor below the bottom of the bed. So there's usually a minimum requirement, what they call a separation distance of that mound and the bottom of the beds of 4 feet. We still had something like 8 feet of safety factor, so we could go up another 4 feet and we wouldn't have to worry about encroaching on that 4-foot distance. The other thing is we actually had some precipitation event. We actually put data loggers in those wells. And what they do is, as opposed to somebody going there once a day, once a week, whatever, and taking a manual measurement and writing it down, these loggers were actually recording the groundwater level over the course of several weeks. That's how we know about the precipitation event. And they were pretty flat. What that means is that even the precipitation that occurred really didn't change the groundwater level. Most likely because there's so much storage up above that it's much more dissipated. So if you have a lot of rain, it's not a rapid increase as far as that goes. So yes, we did take into account in terms of this concept of safety factor that even if that was an extremely low level, which it didn't appear to be based on the USGS data, because one other thing I can add is that during the fall into the winter, the trees don't take up groundwater. And so evapotranspiration, which is one of the natural causes for groundwater level decline, is not in effect at that time. So usually that's when the water levels are coming up.
Thanks. And a follow-up, you said that you were working with the Studio G renderings in terms of how and where things could be placed. Would a different setup, a different layout, different configuration affect your recommendations?
I don't think it could. What it would do is, depending on how close, it really has to do with the positioning. Obviously, to be honest with you, the optimal scenario, based on not necessarily the mound height, but the spread, was actually to have the 3 separate beds. It actually worked out better as far as that lateral extent. So I guess it would really depend on where they were. It would depend on how close they were. The one thing we have to keep in mind is the mound really can't encroach more than about 1/10 of a foot to the channel, the riparian corridor over there for Silver Spring Creek. And that's just a state requirement. Though we've had informal discussions with DEP on that, and because of the proposed nature of this development, that is something that they would consider waivering.
Okay. I see Ryan has his hand up, and then Tim Sayer.
Sorry, I made a few notes to myself here. So the initial flow calculations were developed with Scott Horsley, and for that we were looking at servicing both the whatever would eventually happen at the campground as well as a number of the surrounding properties. It's both the residential streets, so Silver Spring and Village Lane, and then the Wellfleet Drive-In Theater, and then down to the 2 motels, the Wellfleet Motel and Lodge, and potentially we also wanted to have enough of a flow factor to also take more if necessary. So less than half of the flow that's being evaluated for would be generated by the eventual development on the campground as it is currently conceived. The rest would be from that area, and it could be extended. You know, we could potentially service with Great Woods Field with it as well, if there's sufficient. You know, basically, it's all a matter of cost and distance. The thinking was it was best to evaluate it for a larger flow capacity earlier, rather than starting at a certain level and lock ourselves in, and afford the town that sort of flexibility. Frank, can you talk a little bit about the DEP requirements in terms of the evaluation that's necessary on down gradient receptors? Just because I'm familiar with it in the context of another treatment site that we're looking at the transfer station for basically a centralized sewer, but for those that aren't necessarily aware of those, are you able to talk about the DEP requirements for evaluating the impacts to down gradient receptors?
Sure, Ryan. I mentioned earlier about the WP83. So what that is that's the permit application for the subsurface disposal. Part of that is going to, we'll have to incorporate proposal for monitor wells and a monitoring sampling program. And that'll have to, that will be part of the plan. So these monitor wells, bear with me for a second. I'm going to pull that back up if I can. Sure. Okay. So we put them on these wells, I call them monitor wells because they can be used for that. Were located primarily with respect to getting an overall idea of groundwater flow pretty much throughout the site to give us some pretty expansive resolution. What Ryan's mentioning is that as part of the WP83, when you decide on the configuration that you want to go with, let's just say for argument's sake, let's go with the more complicated one here. So groundwater flow under natural conditions is going to go from southeast to the northwest towards Silver Springs Creek. And so one of the things that they're going to want to have is a network of monitor wells, similar to what we're in here, but they're going to be sited a little bit differently because now we have an idea of what the mound will look like. And the whole concept is they're going to be on a regular sampling basis over the course of the lifespan of these beds and the use. You'll establish a background condition. So you're going to be looking at nitrate. You'll be looking at some other components like pH. We'll provide a listing based on what's currently in the regs, but the state may come back and add to that. And the whole concept of that is to confirm that whatever's going into the beds is not changing the water quality as one approaches the down gradient. So this is the down gradient, okay? The slope, the high point to the low point is not impacting the groundwater quality at these locations. And that's the way by which you establish, one of the ways you establish compliance with the regs. That, as well as what the water level rises are, you'll have to monitor that. And that'll go into a program, I believe, will start off potentially quarterly and then go back into something like semi-annual over the course of when the beds are. And obviously one of the things that'll have to be established will be the what the background quality is. So before these beds even go in or go into use, you'll want to establish what that water quality is. The other thing is there's wellhead protection areas. We have several small system wells. In fact, there are two on the site, one located over in this area here. I believe there's one over in this area here. Those wells are, I believe, the representation has been made that those wells are going to be abandoned. They're no longer, they will not be part of the future development of the property. So that's a good thing because it takes them off of the radar in terms of concern about impacting their quality. I don't have the map up here. Ryan, maybe you know better than I do, but I believe there's a small system well somewhere on the other side of Route 6. I believe there's another one further down to the southwest. When those wells pump, obviously they pull in groundwater from distances. And so one of the things we're going to make sure is that if one of those distances encroaches upon the property line here, we want to make sure and establish and confirm with the state that the water quality has not been impacted. Is that what you were thinking, Ryan?
Largely, yes.
Okay.
And those two wells directly across the street on Route 6, we've had discussions with that's the drive-in and movie theater property. And they're planning on abandoning those wells as well. They actually have been working with the town of Eastham long before the town of Wellfleet in terms of extending Eastham's water line to service the drive-in property.
Okay. Tim Sayer?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Apologize for not being at the meeting, but I had family plans and could not make it. The question goes out about the wells that are currently being used by housing that's in relationship to the Maurice's area. You have a hotel there with, I believe, 60 rooms. You have housing on Village Lane. We're talking about centralizing all of their sewage or wastewater into one place where it's all going to be treated. And then pump 120,000 gallons a day into an area for it to be dispersed. What is the chances that that water that's being pumped in will affect the wells of the people that are currently living in the other areas, since it's not spread out anymore?
So the water is going to be treated. So in terms of my understanding is we're anticipating that it'll have, it'll basically be, have to follow best available nitrate reduction technologies and tertiary treatment. So the quality of the water that's going into the ground should be pretty close to natural. And by the time it gets off site, it will have assimilated with that background water that already exists at the site. That's one of the reasons, actually, Tim, for going through the whole process of establishing the background concentrations. The good thing about it is that this water now will be coming from, I believe it's going to be municipal water provided by the town. So what's going to happen is you're going to see an increase in recharge to the aquifer system actually at that location. And then based on the groundwater flow directions and so forth, it's going to be staying within the aquifer systems, pretty much that underlie the town. So it'll be centralized, but it won't represent a loss, except for when it naturally discharges to surface water bodies into the bed.
All right, thank you very much. And John, I'll put my hand up later once you're done with wastewater. I have a few other comments. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Tim.
One more question.
Yeah, Josh? I'm sorry, Barbara?
It can wait, thank you.
My question is quick, I promise.
Yeah.
I appreciate the overview, and thank you for rapidly catching me up on this. When we speak about 50,000 and 120,000 gallons a day, and please correct me if my math is wrong, it often is, but if we project 110,000 gallons a day per bedroom, we're looking at somewhere between 450 and 10,090 bedrooms that this parcel could potentially hold in terms of groundwater discharge. Is that an accurate statement?
How much per bedroom were you saying?
It's 110.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's right.
You ran into thousands, and I was like, wait a minute.
No.
No,
trying to-
that's typically a number that's used for Title V. Again, I did not do the calculations on the actual numbers. Those were the numbers that were provided to us, the 50,000 to 120,000. So I really can't comment as to how, because we took no part in that at this
totally
point,
understand.
as to how those numbers were calculated.
But just to confirm, what we're saying is groundwater discharge at this site could possibly, at 120,000 gallons a day, support nearly 1,100 bedrooms with a high degree of accuracy. Is that what we're saying?
That's
I'm
about
not-
right. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So,
Yep.
and that should in no way be construed as I'm suggesting that number of bedrooms at the facility. But there's been concerns that we've received that the groundwater discharge can't accommodate the density we're proposing. We are proposing a density in the master plan that is far less than that number. And so if anyone had a question, if Maurice's Campground could handle the discharge amount that is being planned, what I'm hearing is that it can. And so,
Yes.
in terms of filtering community concerns that we have to address versus community concerns that we can dispel, I just want to make sure that that's one of them that we acknowledge. Thank you.
No, that's why I made sure he was at the meeting. Because, I've seen concerns that it's going to raise nitrogen levels and so forth, and that's why I wanted him here to address that. I can't address it, you can't address it, but he can. Barbara?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to hear about the overlay district, but maybe there's more on wastewater and it could wait until after that.
We can move all, we
Okay.
can come back to wastewater.
Sure. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you to Emily for pointing out that the property will be developed under conventional zoning and not under 40B. I think that is as important as Emily has suggested. So I'm just interested in hearing from the committee, possibly staff, possibly the consultant, about how things are looking in the overlay district and what are you looking at in terms of uses and dimensional controls?
Yeah, just to add on to that, that's why I wanted the planning people here too, is because, again, each of us on the select board has our areas of, expertise in areas where we're not very expert. I know a lot about the marina, but I don't know so much about zoning, for example. You do. You know more than I do, but.
I know something about it, but I'm very interested in hearing, from the committee about what their work has been so far.
Okay.
So Kenan, our consultant, is on the Zoom, so maybe she can give an overview of.
Sure. Yes, interested in hearing from Kenan, definitely, but also just, what the committee's thinking has been, and again, if staff has had any involvement in the overlay district as well, sort of what you've heard and what you're thinking about priorities, so maybe from Kenan, but also from members, if I could.
I mean, what we're trying to do with the overlay
Yep.
is to provide zoning that can accommodate what has been proposed in the master plan. So under existing code, you could not build what we're proposing. So
Right. Right. Oh, okay. Do you
broadly,
Sure.
what we're trying to do.
I get it. As you see fit, an overview from Kenan or some details from the committee. I think for everyone's, benefit, maybe we could hear from Kenan.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
So when we procured the services for Kenan, we ran that through the select board. There was a certain schedule that was included. Unfortunately, progress has been slower than anticipated by everybody involved. Originally, the goal was to try to have an overlay district ready for this coming annual town meeting, and that's not going to be happening. As part of that, there would have been meetings with the planning board and the select board, as well as community meeting over the winter, typically around, the December to January time frame, going into, continuing into now. But it's been taking longer for things to gel. And we are making progress on that. Kennan's been great to work with. We definitely would appreciate any feedback from the board tonight as well. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. Did we want to get an answer from Kenan?
Yes.
Yes. Kenan, are you, can you unmute?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to meet some of you. So let me share my screen, and there will be some material in here that the committee members have already discussed, and so I'll skip over some of that so you don't have to hear it twice. But I at least wanted to start with what we've done so far on the zoning discussion. So as I think Carl had mentioned in the beginning of the meeting, the idea with the zoning scope is to do a direct translation of what's in the master plan into zoning. There's a gap between those, and the gap is basically where there were some vague outcomes coming from the plan, right? And so I've been working with the committee to try to figure out what those are and how we can fill in those gaps. The reason those gaps happen is because zoning is really specific. So it's not that there's anything missing from the master plan, it's just that a zoning overlay is a much higher level of detail that's needed. So to date, we've had 9 committee meetings about zoning and completed a number of surveys, reviewed different overlay examples and also different seasonal dormitory examples, since that's a new model, to Wellfleet. And there have been a number of preliminary votes for recommendations coming from the committee so far. So those have included our recommendations for subdistricts, use regulations, parking and affordability regulations. Those will be translated into a full draft that the committee will then review and recommend again to the select board. So some of these things, there of course is room to change from the committee members here. What's forthcoming is more discussion about dimensional regulations. We've had a few initial meetings about that in the fall, but have put that to a little bit later to kind of work through some of the other regulations first, and then a full draft amendment. So I know everyone's not necessarily on the same page around zoning and what that might mean in this case. And so I wanted to at least provide a very quick overview of what zoning can do and what it can't do, if you're less familiar with it. So in general, zoning is a set of rules that determines what can and can't happen on any property, whether public or privately owned. It kind of sets out the rules for what can be built, how much of that thing can be built, where it can be built on the site, and how it can be used, things like land uses. What it can't do is determine when a project is built. That's kind of determinant of the economy and costs, infrastructure, limitations, things like that. It can't guarantee that a particular site layout or design, such as the 2 options you saw in the master plan, be built exactly as set. There is a separate type of zoning that it would be completely inappropriate in this case for that use. That usually happens when there's a development proposal in place. It cannot say who will build and how a project is to be built. That's controlled by the town itself and by whomever they partner with for development and construction. And it can't supersede any life safety code or state and federal regulations. So an overlay is a little bit different than a traditional zoning district that you're probably used to working with. Wellfleet actually already has 4 of them already in place. And it's basically a way of modifying or placing additional regulations on an existing district. You often see them as a protection measure for sensitive environments or historic buildings, but you can use them as an incentive as well for a type of development that you'd like to see on a particular site. So in the case of the zoning overlay we're talking about, this would be a kind of an opt-in So a property owner, in this case the town, and the development partner could opt into using the requirements in the overlay district, or they could choose to follow the underlying zoning. I think that's important because I think the way those work together are a little bit unique. For now, I think we shouldn't really talk about the underlying zoning in this case because, as we've heard before, there's a lot that is very different from what you've seen in the master plan. So really just think about this as the overlay, as the set of rules we want to see to control the master plan outcome. So an overlay can accomplish a number of things. The dimensional use controls, it can determine how a property is laid out. So how close buildings are to the surrounding properties. It can also determine how close they are to each other within the property itself, how big things can be, how many parking spaces can be there. And it can tell you, things like how much affordability is required in the overall site, terms of residency, for example. And then it can require, different types of site planning processes like design review. And with all of those, the opt-in means that you can be more restrictive than you typically could in an underlying zoning. So things like terms of residency and affordability are on the table in this case. So the site, I think most of you probably are familiar with, is in the R2 district, which right now only allows for single family homes, buildings of up to 2 stories and 28 feet, which is a story smaller than what's in the master plan, and it has a minimum lot size. The parking ratios are also very different from what is called for in the master plan. So I want to say there's a number of other tools. We've heard some of them mentioned already. So zoning isn't the only one, and it's often not the strongest. In fact, it is very strong, but a deed restriction and a land disposition agreement that is done through an RFP process and a public disposition are generally thought of to be stronger protections if they're done right, and thought of ahead of time, which the town has been doing a lot of forethought into that, and so has the committee. And so I mentioned that because there are certain things where the way the committee, or at least I have recommended to the committee that we look at things, is to promote flexibility so that there's the best outcome, with the understanding that some of these controls are better suited in a land disposition agreement, where things can be really specific. So when translating the master plan to zoning, there's a number of priorities that we've kind of looked through, and these are kind of ranked in order. The first is to reflect the spirit of the master plan, and that's by kind of expanding the principles that you might see in the master plan when they're not explicitly discussed. The second is to maintain flexibility when it does not conflict with the master plan, and that's really to make sure there's the most possibility for success. So you have more responses from developers, hopefully better responses from developers too, because you're allowing for more flexibility, and it means that there's more flexibility in how the development could be funded and the ability for that to be changed if, say, new state funds are available, for example, in the future, something that we can't predict at this point in time. The third is to minimize negative impacts, so that'd be associated with kind of use or environmental impacts. Fourth, minimize the changes to the use table in comparison to underlying zoning. I say that because there's a few uses where when you look at the entire chart of what is currently recommended, it will say, for example, trying to think of a good example, you'll see some soon, I think, authorized by special permit, a stable. The committee is not recommending that there be a stable on the site. That is just something that is already in the underlying zoning district and incredibly unlikely. So in that case, that's an example where leave things unchanged and just leave it as is in this case. The fifth is to think about pre-existing non-conforming uses as kind of grandfathered in, and so having special carve-outs in the table for things like the campground use, for example. So we've seen these, so I'm going to skip over these a bit already. But the basic idea is that it is animating. When you start to overlay the two master plans, there are things that are similar and different. And this was the basis for the zoning map itself. So generally you found, I think it's actually easier if I go to the next slide. that the land uses were fairly well distributed with all the mixed use to the left and all the residential area to the right. So that was kind of where one division line right now is being drawn on the map. The second is where things are built and where they're not. And so there are larger setbacks, for example, and riverway buffers and planting buffers that we want to make sure that the zoning is, codifying as well. The third is height, and you can see in general the master plan had two swaths of height when you overlaid the two on top of each other. And then, of course, there's common open spaces and making sure that they are usable and enjoyable for residents and anyone from Wellfleet that wants to connect to the Cape Cod Rail Trail. There were also some differences, but when you started to overlay them, you ended up with basically 3 sub-districts. The zone to the left, I would say that the primary characteristics is that mixed use component and allowing for up to 3 stories. The zone in the middle, B, I think the majority of that would likely end up being 2 stories, but we wanted to make sure there was some flexibility if a few larger buildings, by larger I mean 3-story, buildings were needed, especially towards the edge of zone A, that flexibility was in place. But that zone C is really where you see the lower height 2-story solely residential buildings. And so in the master plan, you'll see that's often where the duplexes are located in that case. And so there are also distinctions you can see in terms of larger setbacks for the site that come through in those. So far, the recommendations that I had mentioned that we've already discussed are primarily in the use category. And so I know this formatting is a little bit weird, but I want to say everything on here that's highlighted text represents a change that is different than the R2 district. So everything that is not highlighted is already allowed, authorized by special permit, or excluded in the R2 district. And so I wanted to at least highlight what has changed in comparison to what is new. So the committee so far has reviewed all of the residential use requirements and kind of moved to recommend that they're permitting all principal dwelling types and residential development types be allowed on the site, to allow for that new seasonal worker housing definition on the site, and to allow for things like personal service businesses for people that may work from their home, and any kind of structured parking that supports the residential uses, which is different from the way parking's currently written in your zoning, and also tiny houses coming out of the seasonal communities regulations be permitted on this site. Everything under authorized by special permit that's already exists today, and under exclude, the recommendation is to really take hospitality and camping uses off of this site, so there's no incentive in the future to rent those out for those types of uses. And then I would say there's one special one that was added, which was to exclude pickleball courts and to provide a new definition for it, just because of the noises associated with that and having so many people living in closer proximity in comparison to the rest of Wellfleet. The next is the institutional, farm, and heavy commercial. So in general, the only real changes here is to permit utilities, and that's to allow for any of the utility with or without storage that might happen for the wastewater, infrastructure or any other infrastructure that's needed on the site. For example, if there was any kind of solar infrastructure that may be in the future. The second is to permit a health care clinic if that is an option. And really, I would say with that, it's really to maximize the number of options for that zone A, the part that is right against 6.2. So when they're trying to find a tenant for that smaller retail space, there's the most options possible for filling that, and there's no vacancy. Everything you can see here else remains exactly the same as is. So really, those are the only 2 changes on these 2 tables. So of course, everything in heavy commercial is excluded. In this case, I want to at least reiterate. For commercial uses, there were a few other things that are being recommended for change. Again, as I mentioned a minute ago, we really wanted to think about how you could maximize who can rent out and use those spaces. And so there's the ability for that to change. For example, if the town's need changes in the future. So let's say there is a need for, I don't know, if let's say nursery school is written here, or a restaurant facility, right? Anything like that in the future, that those uses can happen within that zone A. And so you can see there's a recommendation here for permitting nursery school and personal service, which was also on the residential chart, across the entire subdistricts, all subdistricts. And then under special permit, allowing for nursing homes or any kind of service trade business. And then, of course, to exclude the pickleball court, as mentioned before. The one part that is a little bit different here is that the commercial uses are broken down further to exclude them from all of Zone C, anything that's listed here. So anything that is in Zone A or B is recommended to be permitted. And those would be any kind of retail use, indoor restaurant, indoor amusement, an animal hospital, let's say, or other smaller business that may want to occupy that, so business office, and to allow for kind of temporary activation, especially in Zone A for food trucks and any kind of semi-permanent stand. And of course, if there's a public facility, welcoming that onto the site as well. The intent is not to put any of these in Zone B, but we wanted to kind of recommend or wanted to maintain flexibility in case there is some kind of component, especially one that might just serve residents on that site, that it could be located there. And I think that would be very well controlled through the land disposition agreement too.
Through the chair.
The committee's also reviewed all of the parking regulations to date. And so you can see there are no changes to the non-residential use requirements. There is a new recommendation of 0.3 spaces for each dormitory bed that was discussed heavily by the committee and was raised from 0.1 that was in the master plan. And the residential uses are reflective of exactly what was recommended in the master plan, with the number of spaces being dependent on the unit size, with 2 spaces for 4 bedrooms or more, 1.5 for 2 to 3 bedrooms, and 1 space for studios or 1-bedroom apartments. And I just want to remind everyone these are a minimum. A developer can build and will build more if the market calls for it and if the town asks for it. I think these have been reviewed now twice by 2 committee members, so I won't go into the details, but this is basically the language that Emily really worked on and shaped to set up how the housing regulations would be codified into zoning, controlling the area median income limits, the ratio of affordable to attainable units, in general requirements for residency and things like that. So the things we have left to kind of discuss are really the dimensional controls for the site and how buildings might relate to each other on a particular site. So we know that we need to amend the setbacks, building height, stories, building coverage, and dwelling units per acre. We need to add a requirement for building separation, so how close a building on the site can be to another one, and think about additional setback types. And just to quickly show this, you can see this in comparison to the R2, that there's going to be a requirement, or there's going to be a need to change different categories of what's already in your dimensional regulations. So for example, reducing the minimum lot size will be important because that could allow, for example, a habitat project or another project in the future where there is another development model where, let's say, you make smaller parcels, for example, for home ownership. Not necessarily in the master plan, but it leaves that option open in the future. You can see we'll need to increase the maximum building coverage. The current master plan does not meet the requirement. Some areas will need to be increased to 3 stories. And then you can see that there's a few other things that will be more on a per sub-district basis kind of changes. And then the last category I'd say is to really look at the setbacks, which you saw, I think, a little better on that diagram, where the setbacks between the surrounding properties are very specific to the kind of conditions on those edges and the way that the building should relate to them. So I won't go through all the details here, but I want to highlight that there's a few things on the current schedule. The first is that we'll be delivering a full draft text to the committee for their review on April 3rd and for discussion at the April 8th meeting. From that I'd love to, kind of work with the chair to set up town staff coordination and select board and planning board and other relevant committees, kind of review of that and comments to incorporate into the next draft. You can see there's a little bit of break around town meeting because I know folks will be really busy. There won't be anything with this part of the project, the zoning, that relates to town meeting, but I know it'll be very difficult to kind of work through things when people are working on other things. So the idea is that there would be a draft that comes out at the end of May, a second draft with amendments, and a public workshop after that, so that we can get the most comments from that once it's really been filtered through all of the boards and committees. And then that would lead to another kind of draft for the committee, any outstanding issues, which hopefully by that point are relatively small. And then I would kind of transfer that over to the committee at that point with a kind of final draft from my perspective, probably not theirs, in mid-July. So thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
The town administrator had something, but I just wanted to interject that I think in that schedule we're going to have to work in some more joint meetings, including meetings with public comment, and for sure, before we get anywhere near any final stages. Tom?
Just a question. Thank you.
Use the mic.
Oh. Thank you. That was excellent, and I very much appreciated. Question I have is when you were discussing the possibilities of maybe later on putting in a store or a restaurant or that type of thing, which I think is great. But when we're ready to market this, and I know that's a ways out, will you market areas for pad development, like a pad restaurant or that type of thing? So there's an area within the development set up for that type of use?
I think that is a choice of the select board and the town.
Okay.
And the master plan right now doesn't foresee that. And I think part of that is the density of the site and allowing for the most of the 250 units to be in place. What I've also heard when the committees discuss this is that there's kind of a desire for folks to walk and take advantage of the environment that's already on the site, right, and the connection to the rail trail. And so having something where it is that retail space, let's call it, is on the ground floor and there's housing or seasonal worker beds above might be a better model. But with all of that said, let's say you get a proposal from a developer and there are none that have that mixed use component. This would allow you to do exactly what you just said and to separate that out and have it as a separate property or building.
Thank you.
I have a question. Does the permitted uses, or under what you presented here, the permitted uses or conditionally permitted uses include such items as, say, for tradespeople, say you have a plumber or electrician moving in there who needs a place to store or to work on, a workshop space or storage space, or shellfish gear, for instance. I'm just speaking for myself, but before we would consider any kind of restaurant or anything like that, I would want to see consideration of those items. What are these permitted uses in relation to that, or is that considered an industrial use?
So right now, the way we've kind of talked about it is that anything that is going to have like chemicals or noises associated, because there are so many residents very close, would be excluded. But the uses that don't involve that would be allowed. And so I know the shellfish discussion I've stayed a little bit out of because that seems to evolve pretty quickly. So I'd leave it to the committee members to address that question.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything that Jerry, you or Beth would like to add, or are there any questions for them? They did come to the meeting, so.
Beth, myself, Ann had a meeting with Keenan last week on zoning. She presented the same thing to myself and to Ann and Beth. I made it clear with Keenan that any input that I had given or that we had given was strictly input, and that the direction that Keenan would follow would be from Maurice's campground. They hired her. Anything on zoning would eventually come to the planning board. I did say that as a member of the planning board, I had concerns with a number of the changes that were made or are being potentially added and changed to the 20 acres. If this is not a 40B project, then we have a situation where with zoning, as your question was, is it a permitted use or a permitted use by special permit? So if it is not a 40B project and it's a regular project, most all of Wellfleet, retail store, anything of that nature would come before the Board of Appeals or the planning board, depending on what it is. So that's one aspect as to, is it going to be by right, or is the plan going to be submitted to a board for an overview? And now with a non-40B project, you have abutters that can easily sue. It's very difficult to overturn a 40B project. Once a 40B, and this is just only my information, once a 40B is submitted, even if it is attempted to be overturned in court, highly unlikely it will be. So we have problems of that nature. We had problems along with adding restaurants, adding commercial. At least I did, and the planning board, I will bring this to the planning board at the next meeting, is this is the largest project the Wellfleet will see. It is probably in the worst location that Wellfleet will see. We've just gone through a rebuild of Route 6. Think about 250 units and all of those individuals coming out at the drive-in theater. Even changing zoning in this 20 acres, which I believe the board can get around with spot zoning. I think if it's affordable, the state allows us that spot zoning. But we have to look across the street to the drive-in theaters. There's another 20 acres that is commercially zoned. What is going to happen in the entrance to Route 6 when you come from Eastham to Wellfleet? Traffic, environmental concerns, fire and rescue, police. It is at the far end of Wellfleet. So the police department, the fire department, all have long ways to go to get to that particular situation. When you have this kind of density, and one thing Wellfleet, I followed, when I came on the board in 1980, I followed the lead from the previous planning board members in the layout of Route 6. They wanted to keep it rural. We have been able to, with voter members at town meeting, keep Route 6 rural in nature. I don't mean to certainly downplay Eastham, but when you hit the Orleans Rotary from the bridge, you see basically no development to speak of. Once you hit the rotary and you go through Eastham, you go to 180-degree turn. It's all left-hand turns, right-hand turns, curb cuts. It's a maze. You get to Wellfleet, Truro, most of P-Town, it's now wide open again. With this kind of development in that kind of location, it is extremely concerning to myself, and I believe the majority of the planning board. We're not downplaying the need for affordable housing. We're not downplaying the fact that we need rental income. It's probably, I think if I had to look at the whole thing, it's the volume. We then look at who's going to go there. We have in our zoning service trade businesses, we have home occupation. We have, and home occupation, oystering falls under home occupation. It does not fall under industrial. So right now, basically almost every district in the town of Wellfleet allows personal service trade. The definition of that very quickly is no customers coming in. It's basically plumber, electrician, heating, vent, everything of that nature where they have a location on site, store their equipment, store their trucks, and then go to the customer. It's the same with shellfish industry. The shellfish industry is substantially different than service trade and personal business. Most of the shellfish individuals that work in shellfish work out of their homes. They bring their product back to that location. I can tell you, I can speak to that pretty clearly because my son is involved in it and has been for 20 years. It's not the cleanest. It's not quiet. It needs room. It needs storage space. And it has some odors. I am not, we've got the chairman of the Shellfish Advisory Committee sitting over here, and I know we're not going to hear from them, but when Wellfleet zoning for service trade, for personal service business, for aquaculture, has all been around single-family dwelling. We have a number of 7,000 square foot lots, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 square foot lots. I think those of us that live in the town of Wellfleet drive around, see, and can visually see very quickly where a shell fisherman works out of. That's no offense intended. It's part of the rural Wellfleet. But living with it, having to cull oysters and cull clams and redo all of the work that they do with their nets and with everything, it takes up space, it takes up water, because when they run their machines, they're running water at the same time. So our zoning is not friendly to a project of this nature. It is friendly to single-family dwellings. It can be done with duplexes, triplexes, but with areas around it. Unless an area a good distance away from three-story buildings and apartment buildings, you're going to have problems getting shell fishermen and plumbers and electricians to live in a situation of this nature because they can't expand. They're going to have neighbors completely complaining about noise with trucks, with plumbing trucks delivering their facilities, their pipes, their tubs, everything. Never mind the trucks coming in and out for tides at 6 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, or 5:30 at night. They run around the tide. So our whole zoning in every district except the National Seashore is open to this kind of service trade. And I think the planning board is concerned with how is this going to work and who are we are those individuals that are clamoring for housing in Wellfleet, that are working, that we need the plumbers and electricians, is this kind of project going to work for them? I've been a kind of an advocate of slowing down a little bit. I know everybody says, well, okay, planning board says slow down, but we have what I call a perfect scenario with 95 Lawrence. We're in the process of putting it out to bid. We're processing for apartments. We're going to have a very good idea in the near future as to our shell fishermen, our personal service trades, plumbers, electricians, going to be able to go into those buildings. And where are they going to park their vehicles? Where are they going to park their trailers? If you look at somebody that works in the shellfish industry, they're running not only their own vehicles, they're running their tide vehicles, they're running their trailers, they're running their trailers for racks and bags and the whole 9 yards. So it's really bringing in a new way to look at how the tradespeople are going to exist in Wellfleet. Coupled with the problem where across the street, we don't know what's going to happen with the drive-in. It is commercially zoned, and if all of a sudden something happens, if they're considering bringing in town water, that tells me that they're looking to the future to expand, and if that goes commercial, we may have to, planning board may have to look at the zoning in that area if something of this goes through, because what are we really going to end up with? You look at East Ham, the 100 units that were built. Those 100 units come out on Brackett Road. At Brackett Road, they can go right, they can go to school, they can go left, they have a traffic light. 95 Lawrence, perfect example. They can go left coming out of 95 Lawrence, go over the bridge, come into town. They can go right out to a traffic light and onto Route 6. They do not have, or we do not have, that kind of traffic pattern on Maurice's campground. It is coming out at Route 6 at a very difficult point. So planning board has some serious problems. Planning board also would like to see, and we are working on it, chair to chair. We'd like to see more input between the two boards. So that's an overview.
Yeah, just one quick note here. Got a chat from Frank Getchell. Unless he is needed to answer further questions, he'd like to leave by 8:15. I think we could. Yeah, we're past the 8 o'clock mark, so we need to wrap up soon. Ryan had his hand up too, but go ahead.
It's really quick, and it's kind of procedural in nature.
Okay.
And I really appreciate the chair's contribution to the discussion, and I know he's been working with the chair of Maurice's on these issues. But just, it's true what the chair said, that this comes to the planning board, and it does for a public hearing, which is required by statute, and the planning board will make a recommendation. But the planning board, doesn't have veto power over what the Maurice's committee comes up with. So that's why this input is really important right now, but it's really up to the Maurice's Committee and the Select Board to decide what goes to town meeting.
And just a quick follow-up to that is, and a question actually for, in relation to something Ms. Actenberg said much earlier. Can this project be staggered in such a way that, we're not trying to do all this at once? We can see how things work as we go.
Yeah, and if I could just add something, I mean, I don't think right now we're talking about a project. We're talking about development of the site over time. So, the zoning overlay, it's not, an overlay district is not a project. It's just telling everybody what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So I would just encourage people to think of this in terms of development over time and not a particular project. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to call on Ryan because he's had his hand up for a while.
From the wastewater.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a few things that I wanted to kind of respond to, and I'll have a question for Barbara to respond to as well. One is, at least in terms of staggering, we've basically been referring to that as phasing. We really need to hire a consultant to help us work through how an RFP might be developed that would reflect that. I know that's a topic later on the agenda tonight, but that is one of the reasons why we really need to hire a consultant sooner rather than later to help us with that. In terms of the traffic issues, so there was a preliminary collection of traffic data in the area. I'm still trying to find out if the ones that were sent to me had included the drive-in property, West Road, I think Village Lane, but it didn't look like it included the campground property, and it was supposed to. So I'm still trying to figure out if that was just an omission or if we need to collect that data this coming season. One of the things is oftentimes the campground is being portrayed almost as if it's vacant. In the summer, there's approximately 230 campsites. All of them are occupied. There is already a lot of traffic in and out of that location. Ideally, I would love to have a traffic light. Convincing the state is where we might hit a snag. When I talked to Stephen Tupper, who's the director, now he's the deputy director of the Cape Cod Commission. But when I talked to him about a traffic light, the state, for whatever reason, uses the average over the full year rather than peak. And this is the same reason why we couldn't get a traffic light at LeCount Hollow Road. But, when I was talking to him, I was like, and I've also talked to the drive-in as well, along the lines of, what if we rerouted West Road to come out, right now it's called Gill Road. It's a dirt road that runs along the movie theater to Route 6 from West Road, because West Road itself is dangerous in the summer, as we all know. Potentially reroute some of the traffic from the drive-in into that road as well. And then we would have the intersection with what whatever eventually happens with Maurice's. And he said you'd have a better argument if you could do something like that. We're still a long ways away from there. I mean, we're at zoning right now. So we just have to keep that in mind. The Cape Cod Commission had also offered to do a preliminary traffic analysis similar to what they did with the Walsh property. The first step of that was collecting the traffic data, which has been done, except for it will have to wait if the traffic data from the campground exit wasn't collected until after after the season. We might have to just put out a bid for that because
we need to kind of wrap things up.
Yep. So, and then the last one is I was wondering if Barbara can talk about the 40B versus an overlay. And I also want to point out to the chair of the planning board that we've had two fully permitted 40B developments. One at Payne Hollow that took 19 years to resolve the outstanding court cases, and one on Old Kings Highway, which is the Habitat homes that were just finished, that also took over a decade. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, so Ryan, through the chair, thank you for the question. I am really happy to talk about 40B versus conventional development, but the chair just said he wanted to wrap things up, so.
Well, I just wanted to move things along.
Move things along. I mean, I guess the simple answer is that with a 40B, the developer requests and receives waivers from not just the zoning bylaws, but also all of the town regulations that would prevent construction of whatever it is the developer wants to build. So there's very little control in a 40B project for the town in terms of what the town wants to see. Whereas if we put conventional development in an overlay district in place, the development will have to conform to what town meeting votes on and says this is what we want to see and this is what we're willing to see. So it's an issue of control. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me.
Sure. Go ahead. And then I'm going to call on Tim after you.
I guess what I'm wondering is this could be completely re-envisioned. And we could decide that as a town, we're going to take these 22 acres and have individual houses that are small and therefore more affordable and make them magnets for electricians and plumbers and shell fishermen. But that is a complete flip from what we were asked to do. And, I think that as far as that would not solve a lot of the other problems. But we can do that, but that's not what we were asked to do.
Okay, well, Tim's got his hand up too, but go ahead.
No, I just wanted to quickly go back to the wastewater and a question for the select board and other boards and taxpayers. We know we're picking up the cost of the Lawrence Hill wastewater treatment, we as the town, with help from state funding. But what's the likelihood that a developer is going to want to come in here and, if we're phasing this, pay for a full wastewater treatment because we're hooking in neighbors? I think we have to be realistic in terms of when we develop this, or else we're not going to have the results that we need. And I think we're looking at some oversight is needed and some we need to, we still haven't been able to justify the number of units that's being recommended, because only 46 Wellfleet residents applied for Lawrence Hill.
Okay, the wastewater issue, that's why I asked Frank about the modular nature of constructing the treatment plant as opposed to the leach field, so that it can be phased if necessary. Tim?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. First, I want to say I look forward to more meetings like this, and also more community engagement and public hearings.
There will be.
But what I did want to say is there's a faction in town that's trying to pit part of the town against part of the other town. The part that wants 250 units to build on Maurice's is trying to say that if you don't want 250 units, and you're saying, oh, we only want 100, 150 units there, then you're totally against housing. That's not true. Everybody I've spoken to is for some kind of housing to be built there. Just because they don't want 250 units doesn't mean that they're against housing. And we need to realize that there's different opinions on this. There's different statements that are being made. But we don't need to pit part of the town against part of the other part of the town. And so I just want us to come together and figure out what we can do. Lawrence Hill is the perfect petri dish for what's going to happen, along with all these other towns that have places that have gone up. Hyannis, I believe Stanwich had stuff. There's many towns that have units that have gone up. We can look at what happened and what's going on in Eastham with the 56 units, I think it is, there that are built. So I think we just need to slow down, back up, take a look at everything we want to do, and let's figure out how we can address the middle group of people that can't afford but can't qualify. And I will wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Tim. If there's nothing else prejudicial, did you have something?
No, I have plenty to say, but I will wait to the next meeting because it's way too late now. And, but I really am here just to listen and learn more of what I can. But, I have concerns as well.
Okay. All right, then, unless there's something pressing, Tom?
Mr. Chairman, I might make a suggestion that we talk about meeting regularly, or, let's set up a schedule, or at least a tentative schedule, so we know that we're going to get back together. And in that period of time between Ann and others that we can, and Beth and some others, we can help work with Carl on formulating an agenda through the chair as well. But we really should set up a time so we know we're going to get back together instead of just saying we're going to get back.
Yes.
No, I absolutely agree.
We should perhaps...
And sooner than later. I mean, not just another 2-3 months.
We should schedule an agenda meeting for this purpose.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if we looked at after town meeting.
You think that's maybe not a little too far out?
That's too
Okay, then sooner. I was just trying to space some things out.
Yeah. Well, we can discuss that, but I would also urge that we include a meeting with public comment as soon as possible.
We absolutely have to do that, and that was something.
This served a purpose which we needed, which was to get all of us on the same page. But
no, the select board did make it very clear that after this meeting there would be a public hearing.
Very good. In that case, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Roll call vote on the select board.
Barbara, aye.
Sheila, aye. Is Ryan still on?
Ryan, are you still on?
Josh,
Okay.
aye.
And,
John, aye.
okay,
That's
what it takes. Thank you.
Okay, and on the Maurice's.
Motion to adjourn.
I didn't get kicked.
Second.
Lauren? Yay?
Yay.
I forgot the gateway.
Everybody's in favor. Okay.
Recording stopped.